Mason Cross, the newly elected sheriff of Silver Grove County, was humming along to the soft tunes of a classic country station as he turned into the driveway of his new home. It was a simple ranch-style house tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. A fresh start. That's what he'd been craving when he left behind the noise and pressures of the city. He'd chosen Silver Grove specifically for its calm, small-town charm. 2 weeks earlier, he had made the rounds, introducing himself to neighbors. Most had responded with polite, if somewhat hesitant, smiles. Except for one, Lorna Beckett, the president of the local homeowners association. She hadn't offered a smile, just a long, assessing stare that made Mason feel more like a suspect than a neighbor. Still, he brushed it off. Small towns were curious by nature, and people like Lorna clung to their routines like ivy to brick. But today, as Mason pulled up to the curb, a knot of unease curled in his stomach. Parked across the street was a white sedan, windows tinted so dark they reflected the sunlight like a mirror. He couldn't see who was inside. Was someone watching him? He shook off the thought and quickened his pace toward the front door. A locksmith was due any minute. Mason made it a habit to replace all exterior locks whenever he moved, regardless of how trustworthy the previous owner seemed. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about peace of mind. Sure enough, when he stepped out of the car, a burly man in coveralls was already unloading tools onto a drop cloth on the porch. Sheriff Cross. The man greeted him with a firm nod. Name's Roy. Ready to get started? Absolutely, Mason replied, unlocking the door and waving Roy inside. He showed him the old brass lock on the front door, then stepped aside, pulling out his laptop to catch up on work emails. His new position had already come with a dozen fires to put out, from budget requests to jurisdictional turf squabbles. 10 minutes in, the doorbell rang. Mason opened it to find Lorna Beckett standing stiffly on his porch, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her lips curled into a saccharine smile that didn't touch her eyes. Sheriff Cross, she said, her voice sugary but strained. I noticed the locksmith. Just wanted to check that everything is all right. Mason tilted his head slightly. Everything's fine, Miss Beckett. Just a standard lock replacement. Nothing to worry about. We do have regulations regarding exterior modifications, she replied. Any changes need to be submitted for HOA approval. Changing the locks isn't an exterior modification, Mason said, keeping his tone calm. It's a security measure. She sniffed, unimpressed. Just be mindful of the rules. That's all I'm saying. Without another word, she turned and walked briskly back across the street. Mason closed the door slowly, eyes narrowing. That was no simple check-in. Her presence, and that mysterious car, were beginning to bother him. Just to be sure, he made a note to visit the county records office the next day to confirm the property lines and deed. He also asked Roy to upgrade the job, install a high-security deadbolt and a full security camera system. As the afternoon wore on, Mason helped Roy set up the last of the cameras, testing angles and making sure every corner of his lot was visible. Then came the pounding. Rapid, frantic knocks echoed through the hallway as Mason stepped into the foyer. He opened the door to find Lorna again, but this time, she looked wild. Her face was flushed, and she clutched at her chest dramatically. Sheriff, you have to help me. He's breaking into your house. She pointed at Roy, who was calmly loading tools into his van. Mason took a slow breath. Lorna, that's Roy. He's the locksmith I hired. She blinked. But I called 911. I thought. Let's clear this up, Mason said, pulling out his phone. He called dispatch, identified himself, and asked if a report had come in. Affirmative, the dispatcher said. Anonymous caller reported a burglary in progress at your address. Mason lowered the phone. Mrs. Beckett, making a false report to emergency services is a crime. Her mouth opened and closed. I was just trying to help. I saw a strange man at your door. I thought, it's your civic duty to verify your facts before calling in a felony report, Mason said sharply. This time I'll let it go. Next time I won't. Lorna's face flushed a deeper red. Fine. But don't come crying to me when something actually happens. And don't think you're above HOA rules just because you're sheriff. With a dramatic turn, she stormed off, muttering under her breath. Mason closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, exhaling slowly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lorna Beckett's hostility wasn't about locks or rules. It was personal. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Lorna Beckett. Her exaggerated performance earlier that day, and that 911 call weren't just neighborly overreactions. They were tactics. Targeted, deliberate, manipulative. He rolled onto his side and stared out the window at the street lamp glowing faintly through the blinds. Was this what his fresh start was going to look like? A war over HOA rules and invisible lines in the grass. He made up his mind. First thing in the morning, he was going to dig deeper. By 8 a.m., Mason was seated behind his desk at the sheriff's office, a mug of black coffee steaming beside him. The deputies were handling the morning patrols, so he closed his office door and pulled up his laptop. He keyed in the database credentials and ran a background check on Lorna Beckett and her husband, Franklin. Franklin Beckett seemed harmless on paper. Retired CPA, no criminal record, no traffic violations. Just a long paper trail of tax returns and HOA financial reports. Lorna, however, was another story. Her name appeared in multiple archived neighborhood watch forums and HOA leadership sites. Mason scrolled through thread after thread, most of them filled with carefully veiled rhetoric, phrases like preserving community values, keeping out disruptive elements, and protecting property aesthetics. The deeper Mason dove, the more the language shifted. One post under Lorna's user handle had read, "Too many outsiders moving in lately. If we're not careful, we'll lose what makes this neighborhood special." Mason clenched his jaw. He knew what outsiders meant. He'd heard it before, in courtrooms, in traffic stops, in police briefings that tiptoed around the truth. Now, it was in his neighborhood. Still, there was nothing illegal about being prejudiced, at least not yet. But Mason wanted more than online posts. He turned to property records. After an hour of combing through deed histories, zoning applications, and survey maps, he found something that made him sit up straighter. Lorna and Franklin Beckett's property line shared a border with Mason's backyard. According to one older survey map from nearly a decade ago, a few feet of Mason's land might technically fall within the Beckett parcel, barely 6 feet into his lawn. A note had been scribbled in the margin, scanned into the document, but clearly handwritten. "Reclaim what's ours. Stop the encroachment." Mason sat back, exhaling slowly. The whole thing clicked. Lorna hadn't just been annoyed by new neighbors or suspicious of change. She was obsessed with control, of property lines, people, and power. And she had no idea she'd picked a fight with someone who didn't roll over. That afternoon, Mason called Roy, the locksmith. "I need those security upgrades expedited," he said. Roy didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in an hour." By sunset, Mason's property had been fortified. Reinforced locks, floodlights with motion sensors, and security cameras synced to a private cloud. He also installed a discreet microphone outside the front door, just in case more visits from Lorna turned ugly. But Mason wasn't just going to defend. He was going to prepare. 2 days later, the real escalation began. It started with little things. First, a notice of violation from the HOA, unapproved security camera installed on front porch. Then another, mailbox color does not meet neighborhood standards. And then a third, grass exceeding HOA-regulated height by 1.5 inches. Mason took photos, reviewed camera footage, and measured the lawn himself. The claims were fabricated, petty, desperate attempts to provoke him. Each notice bore Lorna's signature in tight, slanted handwriting. But Mason didn't react. Not outwardly. Instead, he filed them all away, neatly labeled in a folder he titled Harassment Campaign, Beckett. Then he made a call to the county attorney's office. The next morning, Mason sat across from County Attorney Danielle Hargrove in her downtown office. She was a no-nonsense lawyer in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. Mason trusted her. After he laid out everything, Grace's, now Lorna's, online activity, the bogus 911 call, the forged HOA violations, and the suspicious property survey, Danielle leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "She's building a case," Danielle said, "or at least laying the groundwork to harass you out of that house." Mason nodded. "She's trying to force me to sell or move. Classic hostile HOA behavior, but racially motivated." Danielle tapped her pen on her notepad. "You could build a harassment case, possibly even a civil rights violation under state law. But you'd need a little more, something that crosses into intimidation or property damage." "I think she's getting ready to make her move," Mason said. "She wants those 6 feet of backyard. She's just waiting for a way to justify action." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Then we wait with her. But you stay ahead. Keep documenting everything. And Mason, if she steps 1 inch onto your property, you call me immediately." And then it happened. A week later, just after dawn on a Saturday, Mason was jolted awake by a loud, mechanical rumble. He threw on jeans and his sheriff's department sweatshirt and rushed to the window. What he saw turned his stomach. A yellow bulldozer, trailed by a flatbed truck full of gravel and fence posts, was parked on the edge of his yard, right along that disputed boundary line. Workers in neon vests were unloading supplies. And there, standing like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Lorna Beckett. Her arms were crossed, her chin high, and a smug smirk played on her face. Mason stormed outside, boots crunching on the gravel. "Lorna," he said, voice like thunder, "what the hell is going on?" "Sheriff Cross," she said, her tone sticky sweet. "We're simply reclaiming what our deed says belongs to us. Your fence is encroaching. The HOA reviewed the plans and approved the correction. You were given notice." Mason narrowed his eyes. "No, I wasn't. You must have missed the letter. Not my fault." Behind her, the bulldozer rumbled to life, its engine growling. The blade lowered, inching toward Mason's fence. He stepped in front of it, holding up his hand. "Stop. This is Sheriff Cross. I am ordering you to cease all activity immediately." The driver hesitated, looking past Mason at Lorna. "Keep going," she barked. The bulldozer inched forward. Neighbors started emerging from their homes, drawn by the noise. Phones were already being raised to record. "I said stop," Mason shouted, his voice cutting through the morning air. Still, the bulldozer crept forward. That was it. Mason stepped back, pulled his badge from around his neck, and drew his sidearm, not pointing it at anyone, but holding it low and ready. The sight of the sheriff armed and in uniform brought everything to a screeching halt. The bulldozer's engine choked and died. Silence fell. "You wouldn't dare," Lorna hissed, eyes wide. "I would," Mason said, his voice ice cold. "This is trespassing, illegal demolition, property damage, and you're inciting it. I'm acting in my capacity as sheriff of Silver Grove County." He pulled out his phone and called dispatch. "This is Sheriff Cross. I need backup at my residence. I've got an illegal demolition in progress, trespassers, and potential civil rights violations." Lorna's face twisted in rage, but she held her ground. "This is my neighborhood. You don't belong here." Mason didn't flinch. "That's not for you to decide."